Hello, guten Tag und grüß Gott. Today is February the 24th, 2023, and it is a Friday. Well, sunny California isn't so sunny today. In fact, this morning the news service was, the local news service was extended for an hour before NBC International or NBC National, the Peacock station, came on and did their morning Today show. And the reason it was extended is because California is going through a really terrible weather condition right now. Terrible, but good. Good in the way that it's providing a lot of rain and a lot of snow, for empty reservoirs, and basically, I think we're breaking the cycle of drought. So, yeah, snow everywhere. 4 foot of snow. They're predicting 5 to 7 feet of snow in Big Bear. Oh, wow. This is something. And this is not stopping. It's going to go on right through the weekend and maybe even part of next week. So road conditions are going to be rough for a while. Temperatures are plummeting. So this is really totally unusual weather for California. It's we did have snow once in a while in Orange County, but it's like a rarity. Maybe once in a decade or once in a couple of decades. I have a suspicion that it's actually part of some sort of a El Nino or La Nina effect that's going on. And it's probably cyclical to some extent because it's now been it's been from the 80s, so it's been about 40 years since the last conflagration here in Southern California and the West Coast altogether, with a lot of rain and a lot of snow and so forth. There were floods. The Colorado River was overflowing, actually inundating parts of Bullhead City and some of the surrounding areas. I've seen water in houses, not the water, but the water line. Subsequently, it was up to, waist high, maybe 3-4 feet high. So people really suffered, with that sudden onslaught because the dams couldn't handle the inflow from the Colorado River and Lake Mead and whatever was upstream over in that area, and so it was about 1982 or so that it was maybe early 83, 82, 83. Where severe flooding happened because they had to open the spillways, and when the spillways are opened in order to prevent the dam breach, bad stuff happens, and it just had to send a lot of water down. Anyway, all the reservoirs filled, but we haven't had crap for rain since then. It's really kind of not so good. We've had a little bit occasionally just to kind of break the severe drought. But when we're talking about the weather, it's which is not really the biggest story right now. It's the biggest local story today, and tomorrow it may be something else. But talking about the weather, these. So we're getting all this rain here on the West Coast and all the snow, and even like up to Canada, it's below zero. Like 3 or 4 degrees below zero. So they're and having 3-4 feet of snow and that kind of thing. So what's happening in the rest of the world? In Venice, the canals are running dry. Give me a break. This weather goes all over the place. Yet, the Earth is really the most stable planet that we know of. Well, we don't know that much about planets, but we do know it's fairly stable because these minor changes that seem a lot to us, don't wipe out life in general. It's not like the snowball Earth or anything like that, which could happen, or there is this big bulge growing in Yosemite, in Yellowstone or the Yellowstone Park. They're calling it the Big Bulge, and if that ever lets go, Southern California is going to be in an ice age again. Excuse me. When I talk a lot, I have to cough because I don't normally talk so much. But let me get back to something a little more severe, and that is today is the anniversary, the 1 year anniversary of the war in Ukraine, which Putin calls a special operation. And, you know, you've heard my opinion on this. It's really something very tragic. As a matter of fact, now we see, kids having school in subways, in not underpasses, but subway tunnels because, the Russians are shooting rockets and they're worried that they're going to hit schools, with children in it. The Russians in the areas that they have captured so far, and they're kind of they're in control, a total control of about 5% of the Ukraine, but there's about the war zone is like 25% of the Ukraine, which is mostly on the eastern and southern part of the Ukraine. And it's said that the Russians are actually sending their soldiers in. Basically sending their soldiers in to die in order to gain a few inches of land. And so by now, we think, there are at least 50, maybe double that amount, 100,000 or so people have been killed and wounded, in the war. And so it's tragic, and it's about roughly the same on both sides. I have not seen that, one side is actually less affected. However, the Russian country itself, Russia, it has seen very little effect. And I think the Ukrainians have sent some rockets in order to destroy some planes that have been, or missile sites. I'm not entirely sure, but I think the West is being very cautious about escalating that war into Russia. But the bottom line is Russia invaded the Ukraine. And, personally, I don't give a shit what the hell the reason was. It's something that should have been negotiated and talked about instead of just simply, drawing your sword and going to fight. And, if the Russians weren't happy with where the NATO border is, they should have really brought that out to the forefront and talked about it. And maybe they did, and we just didn't hear about it. But in any case, having had personal experience of war, I'm taking a very dim view of this. And I've been under Russian occupation, and I've made some videos, talking about the Russians, the Cossacks, and so forth, and how they treated us. And the Russian occupation forces, they really sucked. They were really badasses. And when they talk about atrocities, happening there, I'm fully aware of that. I've seen atrocities right next door, and I've talked about this once before, but I'll say it again, is overnight. There was a woman living with her children next door to us. And in the morning, we found out that that she had been raped all night long, been killed, and the children, the baby was thrown against the wall, found dead. And the kids, because they were crying, watching all this shit happening, they had their tongues nailed to the table so they couldn't cry. And that's what the Russians did. And I have to make a really big distinction between the Russian occupation forces and the Cossacks that actually took our town, the town of Zwickau in Czechoslovakia. That's where that happened. And I was there. I was there in 1944 and 45, and I've seen this. So, I did not see the bodies and all that kind of stuff. But I heard the neighbors talk about it. They all came out in horror, to see this. And I don't know whatever happened to those soldiers, but they were a bunch of dickheads, Anyway, so some of these awful images of the war, they're going through my mind right now because I see what's happening in the Ukraine. So we've been at this now for 1 year, and there's no end in sight. Nobody's talking to each other. The only ones that are actually talking are the Chinese. The Chinese are going to the Russians and say, hey, figure this thing out. Do something with it. And the Chinese are saying to the West, saying, oh, well, we're on the Russian side. We're going to help them, you know. And so, that kind of puts a rift between us and China. And let's face it, China supplies, probably most of our goods, and I think a lot of companies are now being very careful about this, establishing, manufacturing in China because, even Chinese companies, Alibaba found that out, the party just, said, wait a minute, billionaire Ma, this whole thing that you're doing here, that belongs to us, So if you don't toe the line, we're going to take everything from you. And he's towing the line, so here we go. Yeah, so the powerful blizzard, the war in Ukraine, and Turkey just went through a horrible time, in a town called, let me see, I think I wrote that down. Yeah, Jandaris, if I pronounce that right. So they had a 7.8 Richter scale strength earthquake, and now there are over 50,000 people that have died. And the pictures, from that earthquake, they're horrible. I'm gonna just show what the Wall Street Journal here showed. Yeah, this is freaking nuts. That's what's happening there. Well, yeah. So what else is going on in the world right now? Well, Biden went to visit the Ukraine, which was really interesting. So our president goes to Kiev and visits with Zelensky and the people there. And that had to have been, an extraordinary effort in security because the Russians can bomb Kiev. They're just not doing it because there isn't a lot of gains, except pain. And I think they're more concentrating on infrastructure. They're bombing power stations, power plants, any network distribution centers, and anything that is warlike, they're bombing that too. But every once in a while, they hit an apartment complex. Maybe a missile goes astray, or maybe they're just doing it. Because you know what? I just don't have a high opinion of the Russians. While I really kind of like them in a way. And I'm going to explain to you why I hate the Russians and I like the Russians, okay? There were a lot of Germans that made their home in Russia, and they were called Volga Germans. And from what I understand, there's still a remnant of those people there. And anyway, after World War II, of course, all Germans were expelled, from Russia, or as much as they could find Germans. But, the Germans generally, even in the countries where they live as Germans, they're pretty smart, because they speak both languages fluently. For instance, in Poland, where my folks grew up, and I grew up, I mean, I didn't grow up there, but was born there. My parents could go between Polish and German just instantly, without accent. My parents didn't have a Polish accent, although my dad always said that Mom had a German accent when she spoke Polish, but she could perfectly speak Polish. She spoke several languages. I think among that she was fairly good at French and also, of course, she also learned the ancient languages, so she knew some Latin and Greek and all that because she went to high school, she was an educated woman. And, she, my dad used to make fun because I think he grew up more steeped in Polish society and culture, so his Polish, was always thought of as being perfect, you couldn't tell him from a regular Polak, in Poland. But, nevertheless, our parents were Germans, and that's what, and in fact, the Volga Germans, they were actually Volksdeutsch, okay, because they were not citizens of Germany. But the Germans in Poland, they were stuck there after World War I, and they were Reichsdeutsch, which means they were German citizens. And so that's how we, as Germans, lived in Poland as Reichsdeutsche, which is not Volksdeutsche. Volksdeutsche were recognized by Germany as part of the people of Germany, but the Reichsdeutsche were actually citizens. Volksdeutsches couldn't vote, until they attained citizenship. Anyway, I wanted to explain why I kind of had a love for Russia because, I love their music. I love their singing. They have this guttural singing, Volga, Volga, Matranaya, the Volga is the mother of Russia. Volga is my mother. And, you kind of hear this in the Volga Boatman song, which is also popular in the West. And so my mother was this young woman in her 30s after the war, a good-looking woman. And so, the Volga Germans, that came around were friends of my dad. And, because refugees after the war, they kind of banded together because the locals weren't too happy of having this influx of these immigrants, I mean, this is what's happening now, right here in the U.S. and in Europe, all over the place, the locals are not happy with these people that are coming. And so millions of us, had to escape from the Russians, came to, was, at that time, it was still Germany, and then it became West Germany when the Iron Curtain fell. But anyway, so these guys came to serenade my mother one night, and I remember that because I remember listening to this. All of a sudden, I heard this, harmonious guttural song, and she went to the window and they all clapped, so she knew it was for her. And, then they sang some more, and she yelled at him, "Get out of here." It was like 1 or 2 in the morning or something, it was in the middle of the night. Get out of here, because they all got shit-faced, they came out and decided, well, what are we going to do tonight? Well, let's serenade the good-looking woman, Anyway, that was something. So, so there is this warmth in my heart for Russian music, let's say at least that, but not for the Russians themselves, and I always thought of Putin, before he did this bullshit, as, maybe a savior of Western culture because, he took a hard stand, against, terrorists and Muslims, in his area of influence. And, these guys, the Muslims are basically, they're invaders, they don't want to be, Russians. They want to be Muslims, they don't want to be Orthodox Catholics or Orthodox religious Christians. They want to be Muslims, they want to establish themselves in countries, where they can live a little better because, in their own country, it's not so good. So they come elsewhere, wherever they're let in because, well, look at Syria, we bombed the shit out of their places over there. And have war, and where the hell these people going to go? I understand that, so they go wherever they can. From Africa, a bunch of shithole countries, dictators, driving these old Mercedeses around, killing people. And all right, I think I'm going a little bit over the top on all this, but just know this, that I do have a great respect for Russian culture, probably Tsarist Russia, not communist Russia. So maybe that's the distinction I can make, So, what are we even talking about here today? This is really a disjointed video. And I'm using that phrase in particular because I love to watch a guy by the name of Matthew Carlson, who's the fishfluencer. He reviews sardines, and I just happen to have a love for sardines. And he said something. He starts out his videos, with saying some sort of a phrase like this. What are we even talking about here today? So, Maybe I'll just adopt that as some sort of a moniker. What the heck are we even talking about here today? So what else do I have? Well, they're the Chinese spy balloons. Jesus, I mean, this is a big news story about shooting down these spy balloons. And they're fairly sophisticated. The one that was shot down over the Atlantic, I think we shot down about 4 or 5 of them right now. They recovered it, and it definitely had spy stuff carrying it. It was pretty heavy stuff. It's like a couple of cargo containers full of spy stuff. So we had airplanes. We had our U-2s with high altitude balloons. 60, 80,000 feet. And, we have very few planes that can do this, but U-2 can. I think they can. We don't even know what the ceiling for a U-2 is. But so the U-2 followed that balloon, across, America as it drifted from west to east, Well, it had to drift from west to east because the Earth drifted underneath it, from east to west. I mean, yeah, works that way. See, so we're always saying, the storm, comes from the west to the east. Right now, this storm is going from the west to the east here in California and all over the nation. And, neglect to mention, that the Earth is also turning underneath the storm a little bit. Okay, so anyway. So yeah, the Chinese balloons, and so I guess we're going to keep shooting these things down. But this particular balloon that we got and let it go across the states and had it followed, they probably jammed the signals, whatever. I don't know what the hell the Chinese can learn with a balloon, that's kind of beyond my pay grade to know, because they also have spy satellites just like we do, and when we know that we're being spied on because satellites come over, we cover everything up, so they don't see. And hell, even the ISIS does the same thing. They also have the tables, when the spy satellites come, so they cover up their bases and their armaments and so forth. ISIS, that terrorist organization that's fighting for Muslim freedom in Muslim countries, freedom to them means, Sharia law, make the women into slaves. Of course, that's an overstatement, but that's essentially what's happening, because women can't vote, they can't do shit, they're just basically there to have babies and, otherwise stay covered up, so nobody can look at them, Anyway, just my opinion, guys, just my opinion. So, well, I alluded to this in a previous video, is that the circus came to town and then bought the town, and that's Nipton, California. Nipton, California has that infamous Hotel California that I keep thinking, that the Eagles actually, somebody that wrote it, was driving along a straight desert road, I mean, Nipton is like 80 miles from, or 100 miles from Las Vegas, and it's out there with nowhere, I've talked about the straw man celebration and all that kind of stuff, but yeah, that's something. And of course, the other funny thing is, evidently they finally did corral the fugitive cows, in Canada, and everything is back to normal again. But in the meantime, people have established, I think websites for the cows, and Twitter accounts. The things that we have to do, it's really something. I just want to show you today's Wall Street Journal, which is February 24th, and this is really, to me, it's a heart-wrenching picture, and topic. They're having a Memorial Day today because it's the 1-year anniversary, and this just really, really sucks, big time. But what's really also strange, or let me just show you something else here. Now, this is the Wall Street Journal, okay? So we give this the national, international things, that have to be portrayed. But look at this, that's a little bit older, but, approximated from the same here's a rural newspaper. You see this? There's a Sasquatch on it. And you know what these guys are doing? This is really cool in a way. You know, they're celebrating their winter, you know, with outhouse races. Can you imagine that? You see that? These kids are sitting on toilets, you know. That's what's going on over there. You know, it's rural America is still kind of a little bit like the America that I came to in the 1950s, you know, but it's not like that exactly, but it's kind of like that. It's a little less threatening. It's more friendly. You know, people are more neighborly. They have great suspicions of Californians. You know, I mean, they just it's really it's really something that you know, is being preserved. You know, and of course, you know, they're kind of the red areas of the states. You know, the more conservative type. But it is kind of tragic, you know, that the Democrats, you know, who are now running all of the major cities, are turning them all into shitholes, you know. And I'm not exaggerating, because San Francisco used to be a wonderful place to visit, you know, come there anytime. Now, you know, the sidewalks are lined with, you know, homeless tents and all that stuff. And, oh yeah, we got a homeless crisis. Well, they also have a crime crisis. You know, you can't go out at night and stuff. You know, it's really kind of crazy. So, you know, this video is getting a little bit long, but, you know, I kind of hate to end on a sad tone, but I have to, because a couple of more people died that I always held in high regard my entire life, and one of them is Bobby Hull. And you might ask, who's Bobby Hull? Well, Bobby Hull, when I lived in Chicago, was the premier #1 hockey player for the Blackhawks in Chicago. And, you know, he won many trophies for them. He had, you know, I mean, he had, like they said, like 120-mile-an-hour puck that he would race down toward the goals. And, you know, he was basically unstoppable. He passed away. He was 84, okay? You know, it's kind of a, you know, like a little snippet, but it did make the Wall Street Journal, you know, on the front page, on the very bottom. So, you know, he wasn't an unimportant guy. What didn't make the papers yet, but that I have, but it made the internet, was Raquel Welch also died. And she is 82. So holy shit, you know, people in their 80s die. I'm 83. Should I worry? Maybe. Well, I think we've come nearly to the conclusion of what I can do today, you know, and hopefully you've enjoyed this and my little anecdotes. And again, you know, I do have some bullet points written down, but, you know, there is no script. You know, this comes basically from the heart, from the feeble brain, as it were. But again, we must infect the universe with us. So long. Auf Wiedersehen.